What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Saturday, February 22nd edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Four-game NBA slate tonight. Doesn't start till 7:30. Got my stuff done early enough. I figured why not go ahead and do a show, especially because I didn't do one yesterday. Was running behind, so figured I would throw this one out there on a Saturday. For sure, the first Saturday show I've done in at least a year, probably a lot more than that. So going to be confused for probably the rest of the week what day it is. But four games today. We do have some injury news that we're waiting on. We also have staggered start times in all of these games. Slate, like I said, starts off at 7:30. Then you wait an hour for the next game. You wait another hour. And then the final game starts 2.5 hours after the first game. So even though there are only four games, if we are still waiting on news from these late games, I do recommend doing something in a tiebreaker situation or something like that to keep roster spots open. You know, if you're torn between somebody starting at 7:30 and somebody starting at 9:30, I would lean towards the 9:30 guy solely because you will have more information then. Obviously, if we get news from, for example, Utah before the slate starts, that becomes less relevant. But either way, you know, obviously having more flexibility throughout the slate to late swap is useful as well. But going to go through game by game as always and take a look at the player exposures I would have if the slate started right now. Obviously, that stuff's going to change. Take it with a grain of salt, but it will give us perspective to talk through the slate and see what, you know, I think looks important or maybe what players I'm not quite as sold on as the field is projected to be. So starting with the Nets and the Sixers, this is one spot where we have a pretty big question mark, and it is, at least in part, influencing my player exposures here. You can see that Brooklyn is likely to be popular today, and I think that they should be. I do think they're probably going a little bit over-owned for a couple of reasons. For one, this team has a 102, give or take, team total. This is not a team that's likely to score a ton of points, but they are shorthanded. They are missing D'Angelo Russell. They're still missing Tosin. So you do have, you know, minutes available. But keep in mind, they did add Killian Hayes. He was in the rotation last game, played about 21 minutes. They have Maxwell Lewis, who's been out most of the year. He's available. I didn't really project him to play. I gave him garbage time minutes, but like that's another body that could throw things off. Reese Beekman is back as well. He was out last game, not on the injury report today. So my guess here is that one of Beekman or Lewis is in the rotation and the other one is not, but I could be wrong and they could just go 11 guys, which of course would be problematic. And then also, you know, Brooklyn is a team that generally plays their guys pretty flat minutes. We have seen a little bit more playing time lately for Nick Claxton, for Cameron Johnson in competitive games. And then finally, you know, you have a relatively widespread here. Philadelphia, pretty big favorites at home. So there are a lot of ways this could go wrong. And then also going back to what I mentioned before, you're just going to have a lot more information later on in the slate. Like the way things look right now, and obviously I'll talk about it more when we get to the Utah part, but for the Jazz on the second half of a back-to-back, we know that we don't have Jordan Clarkson, but Lauri Markkanen is questionable, and so is John Collins. This is another team where, like, if those guys get ruled out, it doesn't necessarily mean that a bunch of good value is going to open up, but it will at least give you some other value that is viable and that, you know, could end up looking decent. It would be opening up, you know, 60 minutes or so if those guys were to both sit, and they'll just naturally end up being lower owned than the team in the first game of the night, where you're going to know the starting lineup when the slate starts. You're going to know exactly, you know, within reason what they plan on doing when the slate starts. So I do think the total ownership coming into the Nets here is higher than I would like. But at the same time, there's no real denying that this does look like a team that is offering you value on a slate that only has four games, that has LeBron James, that has Nikola Jokic, that has Luka Doncic, that has plenty of stuff that you want to pay for. So I understand why there is ownership coming in here. And as you can see, I'm getting to the Nets, just not quite as much as the field. And then the other question mark here is you can see 9% projected ownership coming into $4,000 Jalen Wilson. I'm getting to 24%. I projected Jalen Wilson to start in place of D'Angelo Russell. So I got to 29.5 minutes on him. I think from looking at other projection sources in the industry, I don't necessarily know who they think is starting, but I don't think they think it's Jalen Wilson. So this is a spot where, like, if Jalen Wilson is the confirmed starter, I assume that the ownership projection on him comes up, and as a result, my exposure to him probably comes down at least a little bit. And if he's not starting, then I would take a couple minutes off of him, and then I assume it would be like Killian Hayes if it's not Jalen Wilson, and I would give a couple more minutes to Hayes. So that's something to keep in mind here too, where this is just going to even out one way or another probably. But one thing to keep in mind with Jalen Wilson is that in his starts this year, he's actually played really, really big minutes. He's averaging like 33 minutes per game as a starter. Again, I didn't go that aggressive on his minutes since Brooklyn does still have plenty of bodies today, but he's been the exception to them running pretty flat rotations. When he has started, they've kind of just let him go out there and play a bunch of minutes. He's not a good point per minute guy, but he is really cheap. So I do want to, mention the potential playing time for him if he does start. I'm getting Nick Claxton right around the field here, 22% for me, 20% for the field. 5,400 is just a good price tag for him on a 4-game slate. There is still plenty of opportunity cost at the position. You have Joel Embiid on the other side here. You have Nikola Jokic. You have Şengün. You have either Walker Kessler or Filipowski. Kessler's not on the injury report, but I'm still not completely sold he's playing. But assuming he's playing, you do have Walker Kessler. You have value potentially from Portland with Klingon/Robert Williams. So there is still opportunity cost, but on a 4-game slate, it's just going to be a little bit lower. And then it's just a good point per dollar value on Claxton. It's nice too. Like, he's not super scoring dependent. So Brooklyn having that low team total isn't going to affect him as much as somebody that you're counting on to, score a ton of points in a game environment where they're probably not going to. So just a pretty clear, strong value on Nick Claxton. I'm getting to Daron Sharp as well. And this is one spot where I don't love it, but it is the kind of thing that just kind of shows up on a 4-game slate, and I don't hate it. Sub 10% ownership to Sharp. He's 4,500. He's a very good point per minute guy. It's just a matter of him finding minutes. He's probably going to play every minute that Nick Claxton doesn't play, barring them both being in massive foul trouble or something. So I have 19 minutes projected to Sharp. I have 29 projected to Claxton. If Claxton gets in foul trouble, which he easily could here, you're probably getting a couple more minutes for Sharp, or I would fully expect you're getting a couple more minutes for Sharp. So I don't mind using him as a way to differentiate. This is a piece, though, where it is kind of risky because we have Robert Williams questionable for Portland. So in addition to the fact that you could just have some stuff value-wise opening up for Utah, for Portland, Robert Williams is questionable. And if Robert Williams is in, Williams is playable, and so is Donovan Clingan. But if Williams is out, Clingan's projection increases quite a bit from a playing time standpoint. So there is the potential that, like, I get Daron Sharp in the 7:30 game, and then we get Robert Williams news at 9:00, and I would really wish I could turn my Sharp into Clingan, for example. But one way or the other, there is volatility here, which is nice. It's relatively low owned volatility, which is really nice on a 4-game slate. Cameron Johnson, 23% ownership. Killian Hayes, 24%. Keon Johnson, 22%. Zaire Williams, 23%. So the field's playing all of these guys in the same range, and I'm at least a little bit below the field on all of them. I think Cameron Johnson's fine. 5,700 is a pretty favorable salary for him. There's no real other high usage guys on this team. You don't even have D'Angelo Russell playing today. So the offense really should be running through a $5,700 Cameron Johnson. If Brooklyn does stay in this game, you're likely getting production from Johnson, and his playing time has been perfectly fine. He's missed some games, he's missed some time this year, but playing time lately hasn't been a problem. I think Cameron Johnson does look like a pretty solid value, small forward, power forward eligible. Killian Hayes, 3,600. Like I said, maybe he starts, and if he does, I would give him a couple more minutes, and he would look really good at 3,600. I'm assuming he's coming off the bench here, and to me, that makes him look good from a point per dollar standpoint, but there is still a lot of volatility here. Like, Killian Hayes is certainly not a super consistent fantasy producer. And you do have other guys that can steal minutes from him, like I was saying before. Like last game where he played 21 minutes off the bench, Beekman was with the G League team. We've seen Beekman in the past step up and be the guy that gets additional minutes when Ben Simmons and D'Angelo Russell are out. I'm assuming that Hayes is ahead of him today, but that's not a guarantee. And there's also not a guarantee that the minutes breakdown is the way that I have it projected and the industry has it projected, where Hayes plays low 20s and Beekman, doesn't really play a lot. I have Beekman in for like 11. I've seen other places that have him in for 5 or 6 minutes. You could just get a really gross rotation where, Beekman plays 16 and Hayes plays 16. Like, there's a lot of volatility in Killian Hayes, which at $3,600 is good, But when he's going to be rostered by a quarter of the field, those are guys that I tend to be a little bit more hesitant to get to when I can just say, all right, if the Brooklyn Nets, who have run terrible rotations all season long, run a different rotation than everybody thinks they're going to run today, I'm just, moving up on a quarter of the field that played the maybe backup point guard here. So there is a lot of risk in Hayes, but again, there is a lot of upside too, because he is only 3,600. And also, if he starts, obviously those concerns about everything I just said go out the window, and he would look like a really good value in that case. Keon Johnson likely giving you somewhere around 30 minutes at 5,200. Not a great point per minute guy, but he should see increased production with D'Angelo Russell out, should have the ball in his hands a bit more. And again, outside of Cameron Johnson, there's really no high usage guys on this team. So you can see Keon Johnson take on a bit more of that. And then Zaire Williams, 4,700. I'm not getting to him much, and I really just don't get to him all that often when he is popular. He's been playing a little bit more lately as a starter, but it's still been inconsistent. And overall this year, he has not been like Jalen Wilson, where if he starts, he plays, north of 30 minutes. You still see him bounce from, 22 minutes to 30 minutes and pretty much everything in between. And he's not a very good point per minute guy either. So while he certainly could do more without D'Angelo Russell on the floor, he's, 0.86 DraftKings points per minute, very similar to Keon Johnson. He's not bad, but he's not like one of these full fantasy point per minute guys. I think that there's just enough volatility here, and he's expensive enough at 4,700 that I'm going to be able to find other stuff that I can get to. But again, if you need to save $500 from him to Keon Johnson, or if you just prefer him to Keon Johnson, any of that stuff is fine. I do just have him projected for a little bit less playing time than Johnson based on what we've seen from Keon Johnson as a starter, especially without D'Angelo Russell, versus what we've seen from Zaire Williams. People in chat mentioned Trendon Watford. I'm a little surprised that I don't have him right now. I had a lot of him the other day. I have him in for 21 minutes. He certainly could play a little bit more, but again, I'm just a little concerned because they do still have bodies, and he's not somebody that is going to be soaking up, at least directly, D'Angelo Russell minutes. Like, even though Tosin's not with the team, you do have Tyrese Martin still. You have Sharp, you have Claxton, obviously. So like last game, you had all of the center minutes go to Claxton and Sharp. Watford still got his like 21 and a half. It looked like maybe he was going to close that game too. He didn't play garbage time, which I actually thought that he would have. They went to Jalen Wilson instead. But it kind of looked like the closing lineup was going to be Keon Johnson, Cameron Johnson, Zaire Williams, Watford, and Claxton, which would have gotten him to like 24 minutes. So I do probably need to add like a minute onto my projection for him. Long way of saying that I think that he is, what the hell? I think that he is fine. I think it's probably the ownership why I'm mostly not getting there. Like, I have a solid point per dollar projection on him at 23, 24 points, but 18% ownership is just a lot when, again, I'm trying to keep roster spots open for later. And it's the same thing here with Tyrese Martin. I have him projected for 19 and a half minutes. I've seen him projected for up to like 23, I think. I don't totally get it. He could play 22, 23. He also could play 15 or 16. There's no need for the Nets to play him a ton of minutes. They certainly could. If he's playing well, he can play more. They could, play him north of 20 if they want to, but they're not short on bodies today. They're short on good bodies, but they're not short on bodies. And Tyrese Martin's not any different than most of these other guys. So I don't really, I went, like I was saying, I went a little bit higher on Beekman's minutes, and I think it cut into Martin a little bit. I just don't really think the Nets are in a situation where they have to play him 22, 23 minutes. Like, if you're projecting him for 22, 23, you're kind of saying, I think he's as likely to play 20 as he is to play like 24, 25. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think he's probably as likely to play 16 or 17 as he is to play like 24. So if the ownership does come down on guys like Martin and Watford, I'm certainly interested in getting to them. Martin is only $3,300, so he's really cheap. But I think it's probably mostly the ownership that is keeping me away from those guys right now, in addition to I might have come in a minute or so light on Watford, like I said. So pretty flat on these main pieces for Brooklyn. Again, I'm assuming that Wilson starts. If he doesn't, I'll be less interested. I'm assuming Hayes is coming off the bench. If he starts, I'll obviously be more interested. But Wilson, Claxton, Sharp, Johnson, Hayes, Keon Johnson, I'm interested in all those guys. The rest of them, I think there are other pieces you can go to. They're just not pieces that I personally am getting to right now. R. Stanley said, who are your top 3 nets? I mean, I guess for right now, it's Wilson, Claxton, Sharp, but like top 3 is a really difficult. It depends how you're defining that. The 3 nets that I think I would probably want to have, like feel the best about having, are Nick Claxton, Cameron Johnson, and then whoever's starting between Jalen Wilson and Killian Hayes. So a lot with Brooklyn will end up having to do with ownership here. Arcathelza said, any chance Roddy steals minutes from Yabu? I mean, there's a chance. I don't think it's particularly likely. I don't think Yabu is the guy that is likely to be losing minutes there. Like you could see, one, I don't think Roddy is taking minutes from any of them, but if he does, I think it's more likely to be coming from Ricky Council. Lonnie Walker, yeah, like Josh said, Lonnie Walker's active as well. I have Council playing ahead of Walker and Roddy. I have Walker playing ahead of Roddy. So that is all up in flux, but from a DFS standpoint, I don't think that it matters. For Philadelphia, Joel Embiid getting 22% ownership. $9,400 price tag looks good here. Obviously didn't play a ton of minutes last game because Philadelphia just got the shit kicked out of them by Boston. So Embiid didn't play in the fourth quarter. He only played 27 minutes. But 2 games ago, I had mentioned on, before this game, before his most recent game, that he did play 38 minutes in regulation a couple of games ago. And then against Boston, he played 18 and a half minutes in the first half. So again, I'm still not projecting him to just go start playing 36 minutes a night or anything like that. But I do have him in at 33 minutes. It's getting him in 30% of my lineups. It's a spot that he should have plenty of success against here against Brooklyn. So I do like Embiid at only 9,400. One of the cheaper price tags that you're going to get on him, coinciding with, I think, his playing time ramping up. So I like getting there. Quentin Grimes getting 18% ownership, 5,100. I assume he's staying in the starting lineup, playing mid-30s in minutes. Happy to get to him. I think anywhere in that 18% ownership range is perfectly reasonable. Ricky Council, 3K flat, showed up in a lineup for me. If that goes away, that's fine. If it doesn't, that's fine. I projected him for 18 minutes. That could just be straight Lonnie Walker. It could be David Roddy. Like, Council's not a guarantee to play. Certainly not anybody that I want to go, crazy on. But if I'm just, in a random lineup, I need a 3K guy and want to hope Ricky Council somehow does well in 17, 18 minutes, then whatever. But probably will go away. Wouldn't be surprised at all if I just don't get there. And be definitely too cheap. Paul George, like 6,900. Paul George played 29 minutes last game. Again, lost playing time because they were getting blown out. He played a ton in the first half. He played like 10 minutes in the first quarter. He played another like 10 minutes in the second quarter. He played like 20 first half minutes. And then, had shorter second half rotations, got blown out. There's a path to Paul George, being a great play at 6% owned at 6,900 is like, it's one of the cheapest price tags you're ever going to get on Paul George. He's not getting any ownership. But he's just been absolute garbage when he's played with Joel Embiid this year. When he's on the floor with Embiid in the full games he's played with Embiid, he just hasn't produced. He hasn't done anything. And that probably does improve, a bit over time. Not that you expect him to be as productive as he is when Embiid's not out there, but I don't expect him to be as bad as he has been so far. But there's also no guarantee that changes today. So, if you want to use George to differentiate, I think that's fine. But even, all of that considered, I'm having a hard time wanting to get to him. Larry C said, how many lineups, since you said he showed up in 1? This is looking at if I played 50 lineups right now. So I had him in 1 out of 50. It's just complete. He randomly showed up in a lineup. It could have been Tyrese Martin. It could have been anybody else. Most likely, I would guess I don't have any of him. The field getting the 10% Kelly Oubre at 5,700, 5% Maxey. Those are both perfectly fine. Obviously, with Embiid in, the production from Oubre and from Maxey comes down on a per minute basis. One other thing that I will point out with Maxey is that while he does play huge minutes overall, he's only averaged 36.1 minutes per game in his games where both Embiid and George have been active this year. Now, you don't have Kyle Lowry today. You don't have Eric Gordon today. So maybe, you still expect Maxey to play a little bit more, but that is something I want to point out because I think we're at a point where Embiid's missed so many games that Maxey's averages are very skewed toward Embiid not playing. And if you look across the industry now, it's just like no matter who's in or out for Philadelphia, you're just blindly getting 37.5, 38-minute projections on Tyrese Maxey. And that really isn't what he's been playing in these games where Embiid is in, especially when you keep in mind you're not trying to project his ceiling minutes. Like last game, if it had been competitive, he probably ends up playing 38 against Boston. He only played 34 and a half because of the blowout. So there's a difference in Maxey's rotations where it used to be he's playing 38, 39, 40 minutes in blowouts, and he's playing like 42, 43 if it's competitive. Now I think you're probably getting 34, 35, 36 when it's a blowout, and you're getting 38 give or take when it's competitive. So I am probably a little bit lower on Maxey than the industry in general, but I think that the overall takeaway is still Tyrese Maxey is going to just go have big Tyrese Maxey games here and there. At 5% owned, you're never going to be wrong for playing him, but I'm not getting there. Einsteinium said, is Butler a solid value? I have Butler playing 6 minutes or something. He wasn't in the rotation last game. He played 3.5 minutes in the third quarter. That was the only time he came in the game. So we had Quentin Grimes basically playing the non-Maxey minutes. So the second unit was Quentin Grimes, Kelly Oubre, Paul George, Yabusele, Andre Drummond, and then in the second half it was David Roddy instead of Andre Drummond. So long way of saying that I wouldn't play Butler today because I'm not convinced that he's even going to play. And yeah, like BJ said, Lonnie can play on ball. I only projected Lonnie for 8 minutes. I assume that they're just kind of going to run him out there, get his feet wet a little bit, but he could just fully be in the rotation. I don't really know. But Lonnie certainly can play on ball as well. It is kind of surprising that Butler wasn't in the rotation last game just because he has played relatively well when he's gotten opportunities this year. I figured that, after signing him to, I think it was a 2-year deal, Philadelphia would play him while they still have the opportunity to do so, but they didn't. And then today you have, Lonnie Walker added also. So I'm not really getting to Oubre or Maxey, but again, I think that they're both perfectly fine. Lakers taking on Denver. In Denver, Luka is back for the Lakers, and he is not on a minutes restriction. He played 33 minutes last game, have him in for about 34 here. Certainly, I think could play more, but not going to get too crazy on the playing time projection until we start seeing it happen consistently. But he is in, and he does look pretty solid at 10,600. Salary has come down a little bit. From his time in Dallas when he was playing 37, 38 minutes. So getting to him about 14% right now. Fields at 13%. I think that looks fine. You have seen his usage come down a bit since joining the Lakers. I assume that he probably ends up with a little bit lower usage rate with the Lakers on average than with Dallas, but you'll still see plenty of games where it's just the Luka show. But right now, I think also you're still seeing him kind of try and fit in and pretty clearly get back in shape too. It kind of painful to watch him run up and down the floor right now. His face turns so red, and it looks like if somebody had one too many beers before a rec league basketball game and then went out and tried to play 35 minutes. That's what his body reminds me of. So I think you're still seeing some rust from him, and then you also just trying to fit in and gel with his teammates. But at 10-6, especially on a 4-game slate, certainly nothing wrong with taking some shots at him. And then same goes for LeBron at 10-3. Obviously, you're not expecting the same level of production from him when Luka's in as when Luka is out. But we have seen LeBron just seemingly rejuvenated by Luka showing up. And we've seen LeBron play really, really well. Physically, he seems to be in good shape. He played both ends of the back-to-back. He played 38 minutes on the second end the other day. So right now playing, really, really well. Still happy to get to him. 13% ownership. I'm getting to about 16. Amjo said, how can you change minutes on SaberSim? I just uploaded my file with minutes in them. You can't do it directly in here as far as I know. So yeah, those are the two Lakers I'm getting to. Those are the two that I would expect to get to. Beyond that, if you're getting small amounts of Rui, Reeves, Finney Smith, Jackson Hayes, I guess any of that's fine. One other thing I will mention regarding Jackson Hayes is that you should expect his playing time to come down a bit with this team healthy because they do have other guys. They can play small. They have Vanderbilt. They have Finney Smith, who's seen his playing time ramp up even when he's coming off the bench. You have LeBron. So I have Jackson Hayes in for, I think, 24 minutes. He only played 18 last time. Alex Len's been in the rotation too. I have him in for 8 minutes. So in 24 minutes, I'm not getting the Hayes, but I did want to mention that when you have Len, you have Vanderbilt in, you have Finney Smith in, you shouldn't be expecting the 28, 29-minute Jackson Hayes games that we have seen from time to time. On the Denver side, status quo as far as what they had last game. Russell Westbrook is back. Peyton Watson is not. Aaron Gordon is probable. Jamal Murray is probable. They started Christian Brown last game in place of Westbrook. They brought Westbrook off the bench. So until I hear otherwise, I'm just projecting it to be that way again, which means like 26 minutes for Westbrook. It means like 31, 32 for Christian Brown, 32 minutes, give or take, for Michael Porter Jr. He loses some playing time when you get Westbrook back. Jokic and Murray obviously going to be unaffected. Aaron Gordon showing up a lot for me and the field. He's only $4,800, and he's playing full starter minutes now. I have him in for 29.5 minutes, but he easily could play more than that. He is somebody that clearly has a role from a defensive standpoint in this matchup when you have LeBron and when you have Luka playing big minutes. So there is that angle where you could certainly see Aaron Gordon out there for more minutes, barring foul trouble. He played 32 minutes last game. He's just too cheap for his role here as a starter that isn't limited anymore. His salary dropped because he had been limited for a while when he came back from injury, but that's not the case anymore. So Aaron Gordon looks very good. I like Jamal Murray at only 7,600. Shooting guard eligibility, for whatever reason, makes him even easier to get to. So that looks good here. Jokic, 12-2, very self-explanatory. If you can afford Nikola Jokic, play him. Westbrook, getting 15% ownership at 5,900. I don't think he's a bad play. Arcathelza said, I like Westbrook even if he comes off the bench as a low-owned tournament play. I would too if he was actually going to be like low-owned. But if he's going to get 15% ownership off the bench, it's difficult for me to find the minutes for him because typically when he's come off the bench, he isn't closing. And so I think you're very often going to see a very similar rotation to what you saw last game where he plays like 25.5, 26 minutes. There will be games where he gets to 28, 29, 30, but that's where the ownership comes in. Like I'm willing to pay $6,000 to hopefully get 28, 29, 30 minutes sometimes if he's like, 5-6% owned and I'm really getting a leg up when it happens. Now it's like you need him to play those minutes to really want him. And he's already 15% owned. So if that ownership does come down, keep in mind, this is ownership from like 5:30. If that ownership does come down, then I think Westbrook starts to look a little bit more interesting. Like he projects around 5x. He's not a bad play at all. It's just that I think he's a very interchangeable piece. Like it's not hard to find good guard plays, and it's not hard to find guys that project around 5x, give or take. So when one of them is just getting a little bit more ownership than others, that's typically a spot where I'm going to just end up finding others. But there's nothing wrong with Westbrook. Michael Porter Jr., 6,200, getting 9-10% ownership. I think he looks fine as well. Only played 29 minutes last game. You did have Westbrook close the first half over him. You are going to get a little bit less consistency in Michael Porter Jr.'s minutes. And maybe I end up taking like, half a minute or a minute or so off of him, give it to Westbrook. But when everybody is active, or most of them are active, most of the main pieces are active for Denver, Michael Porter's playing time does become a lot more volatile. Whereas when guys are out, he just goes out there and plays 36 plus minutes every night. Like if Westbrook were out here, you'd be projecting Porter for like 37 minutes. But because Westbrook's in, that playing time range now is anywhere from like, 27, 28 minutes to 33, 34. So the playing time projection does come down, but he is still 6,200 and just not getting that much ownership. Obviously, he does have a path to a big game just if he gets hot from three, grabs some rebounds. So the upside is still there. Christian Brown getting 3% ownership at 6K, shooting guard, small forward. Similar price point to Westbrook. Probably plays a handful of minutes more, but not the same level point per minute guy. I wouldn't hate it, if you wanted to use him as a contrarian play. We've seen the good Christian Brown games occasionally, but it's not a spot that I'm getting to. Priorities for me look like Aaron Gordon and Murray, and then obviously whatever Jokic I can get to is great. Houston taking on the Jazz. No Fred VanVleet, no Tari Eason, no Jayshawn Tate, no Steven Adams, and then no handful of other guys that don't matter because they're in the G League. So my assumption for the starting lineup here is Amen Thompson, Dylan Brooks, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith moving back into the starting lineup, and Şengün. Smith played like 38 minutes last night. They said he wasn't on a minutes restriction. Then they brought him off the bench, so I projected him for like mid-20s minutes. Tari Eason gets in foul trouble. Jabari Smith ends up playing 38 minutes before he fouls out. I'm obviously not projecting 38 minutes here, but seems like he's a full go, and his primary backups are not playing tonight either with no Eason or Tate. So I think Jabari Smith looks very good at 5K. I'm right around the field getting the 32% of him. Alperen Şengün at 8,500 is very, very, very interesting to me. He's getting 25% ownership. I'm basically 2x the field. My minutes projection on him is a little bit higher than I've seen across the industry. And this is a really tricky spot, I think. Şengün had one game without Van Vliet where he played 3 minutes, got hurt, never came back. So if you throw out the game where he got hurt 3 minutes in, he's averaged like 34, 35 minutes per game in the games that he's played without Van Vliet. We haven't seen a back-to-back yet where Şengün actually plays big minutes on both ends of it. But most of it has been circumstance. Like the game where he played 3 minutes was the second half of a back-to-back. Their most recent back-to-back, where I talked about this exact same thing, he ends up only playing 27 minutes against Golden State, but he played 27 minutes in 3 quarters. Houston was down like 25 points. The second unit went on a run, and they just never left the game. So Şengün never came back in, but he played like 20 minutes in the first half. So I don't think that they're truly limiting him by design necessarily on the second half of the back-to-back. I did still project him a little bit lower than I would have if this were an island game. But the playing time for him has been really good with no Van Vliet. Obviously, Smith was out for a lot of those games too, but now you don't have Eason either. So I do think Şengün plays a lot here. It's a nice matchup overall against Utah. Obviously, Walker Kessler individually is solid defensively, but Şengün's not somebody that, is super reliant on scoring at the rim either. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I like Şengün a lot. Cam Whitmore, 4,400, wasn't in the rotation yesterday, but again, you don't have Tate today. You don't have Eason. I assume that he's going to be in the rotation. I have him in for 20 minutes. I think that most places have him around 19, 20 minutes. And so it's mostly an ownership thing, I think, where if he's going to be 11% owned at 4,400, shooting guard, small forward eligible, and you're going to get like double the ownership going into guys on Brooklyn that I don't think are really that much better or any better, depending on who you're talking about, I'm just going to play some more Cam Whitmore. Like I'm playing him at a similar rate to some of those other Brooklyn guys. So again, if the ownership on him comes up a little bit, my exposures will come down. It's mostly an ownership related play. I think he's an okay point per dollar value, but he just happens to be one of the cheap, good enough point per dollar values that isn't getting as much ownership as some others. Jalen Green playing huge minutes without Van Vliet, played like 39 minutes yesterday, have him in for 34.5 today. I'm a little below the field, but I'm still playing a lot of him at 26%. This one is gross, but $3,400 Aaron Holiday is in 20% of my lineups. He's only getting 12% ownership. I think this is, again, just kind of similar to like the Tyrese Martin type plays from Brooklyn. I assume Holiday's in the rotation for 18 minutes or so. So it's fine. Like I'm not super excited about it. Amen Thompson, Dylan Brooks. I actually thought I'd be getting more of Brooks in particular. Thompson, I might be a little bit low on his minutes projection. We've seen Houston be kind of weird with his minutes on back-to-back sometimes too, but not always. Like he does have some back-to-backs where he just plays a lot of minutes, but we had a back-to-back against Atlanta, I don't know, a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, where he just didn't play a lot. He didn't play a lot in that last back-to-back against Golden State, but again, that was the weird game, the same game I was talking about with Şengün, where the second unit just closed the game, played like the entire fourth quarter. So I have Thompson in for about 37 minutes here. I think you could go a little bit higher. I probably will add on to that a little bit, seeing that I'm not getting him. He's not somebody that I want to not get just because I arbitrarily went with 37 instead of 37.5 or something. But clearly, I think a solid enough play here. Dylan Brooks, I'm actually higher than the industry on his minutes, and I'm still not getting him, which is why I was surprised. 4,900, I think, is fine, but he does only have power forward eligibility. So, I think that makes it a little bit more difficult. I think in certain matchups, Williams is better, but this looks good for him tonight. I don't know which Williams that is or what team that was referring to from a few minutes ago. But Yeah, so Houston in general is going to look pretty good here. Good matchup, obviously. Some of these guys I'm getting to more than the field, some I'm getting less, but I think in general, prioritizing Houston is good. And also, this is the 9:30 game, so anybody that you're rostering from Houston, like Cam Whitmore, Aaron Holiday, they can just turn into pieces from Utah if Collins and Markkanen were to get ruled out too. So you're getting flexibility with them that you're not getting with those Brooklyn pieces. On the Utah side, I have Collins and and to touch on the question about Jabari Smith, he's not on the injury report. So I do think it's tricky as far as like, am I super confident that he's just going to go out there and play normal minutes after playing 38 yesterday? No, but he's not on the injury report. If he starts, especially, I assume that he's just playing normal minutes. If they do something where like they start Aaron Holiday or they start Jeff Green, I would knock Jabari Smith's minutes down pretty significantly into the mid 20s, where I would probably still be getting him a little bit at 5K. But I would certainly assume that if he's not starting, it's in some effort to curb his minutes a little bit. But they had said he wasn't limited. He certainly wasn't yesterday, and then he's not on the injury report now. So there's nothing really to do at this point other than assume he's playing something close to normal minutes. On the Utah side, I do have Collins and Markkanen projected in. My assumption is that Mikhailuk starts in place of Jordan Clarkson. That typically means 23 to 24 minutes for him. Keontae George showing up a lot for me at 6,200. He's averaging about 30 minutes per game off the bench. The matchup here isn't good, but you do have Clarkson out, so that opens up some usage in the backcourt in general. And then he is somebody that would benefit from a usage standpoint too if Markkanen were to not play or Collins were to not play. But only getting 18% ownership, I'm getting to him quite a bit. I think that he looks better than Russell Westbrook does, at least, giving George 30 minutes, giving Westbrook 26. They have similar ownership right now at the same price point. So George is just looking better for me. If Westbrook's ownership were to come down, then some of this Keontae George probably does turn into Westbrook at least a little bit. John Collins right around the field on Walker Kessler. Both the salaries on them are perfectly reasonable. Isaiah Collier, 6K. I'm getting 12%. Fields at about 7. Not a great point per minute guy, but he's not horrible. And he is averaging around 30 minutes or so as a starter. Mikhailuk as a value play looks fine. Lauri Markkanen, a little bit more expensive at 7,100, but again, good player, obviously. And if he does play tonight, you're expecting him to play around 30 minutes or so. So getting to Utah, just not at the same rate that I'm getting to Houston, with the exception of Keontae George. But again, if you were to get guys ruled out here, it is going to open some stuff up. I really am not even going to speculate on what exactly opens up because I have no idea who ends up starting. We know that, at least for right now, Potter is out. So like they probably, if Collins is out, you probably get one of Sensabaugh, Juzang, Springer, Cody Williams, or maybe Filipowski starting. They've generally been using Filipowski as the backup right now to Walker Kessler. If both of those guys are out, then you're getting, Cody Williams probably in the starting lineup. So point being, there will end up being value if those guys are ruled out, but who knows who ends up starting, who ends up getting most of those minutes, because Utah changes that up pretty much constantly. Finally, wrapping things up, Charlotte and Portland. But a reminder, you can get access to my NBA projections using the link in the description below. Use the Dub Club link there. You get a 3-day free trial. You get access to a spreadsheet that updates as I update my projections for DraftKings and for FanDuel. So you get the minutes I'm projecting. You get their actual projection for DraftKings. It also includes live projections when I'm updating to late swap. I put those in for you to use. Potter is out. So yeah, you can get those, link in the description below, 3-day free trial there. Finally, Charlotte taking on Portland. Melo is back, so that does cut down on a lot of the value here. This is a weird one with Nick Smith. I don't really know why he's 2% owned. I don't think he's a great play, but if he's going to be 2% owned or 3% owned on a 4-game slate, I'll take some shots on him. He should still play around 30 minutes with LaMelo back. Obviously, production's going to vary. He's not going to be looked to as a primary scorer or anything, but he is going to be a higher usage guy than at least Josh Green, most likely, as far as the starters go. And at 4,800, he's just not any worse, I don't think, than Zaire Williams. I think Nick Smith and Zaire Williams are very comparable players, all things considered. I have a 20 fantasy point projection on Nick Smith. I have a 25 fantasy point projection on Zaire Williams. So I have Williams, favored by quite a bit, but at the same price and just, 10 times the ownership, I basically just have flipped him and Nick Smith, which again, I don't mind it. I don't love Nick Smith here. If this were like a cash game or something, I would obviously be playing Zaire Williams over him. From a range of outcome standpoint, though, even though Williams has the higher median, I think that they are pretty comparable. So I think that ownership gap is just too wide, and that's why you see that. It's not really a Nick Smith endorsement. It's this guy is getting no ownership and priced right next to Zaire Williams thing, more so than anything to do with Nick Smith. LaMelo showing up 12% for me. Mark Williams showing up 10. 9,600 for LaMelo. That by itself is perfectly fine. LaMelo, should give you 34 minutes, give or take. Matchup is fine, all of that. The problem is that he's $200 more than Embiid. And then you also have Jokic on the slate. You also have LeBron on the slate. You also have Luka, who's only $1,000 more, probably playing similar minutes. So it makes it so it's difficult to call LaMelo a priority, but he is showing up at a similar rate for me to Luka, to LeBron, to Jokic. And then, again, I think Embiid at 9,400 is the biggest priority out of that group. Mark Williams, 8,200. We still don't know exactly what the Charlotte rotations are going to look like. But in the game that Mark Williams did play since they acquired Nurkic, the game against the Lakers, first game back, Williams got the start. He played 29 minutes. Nurkic played 18 off the bench. And then there was like a minute for Daquan Jeffries, who's not playing today. There is some level of risk that we at some point see Charlotte go back to the really shitty three-man rotation that they were running back when they had Mark Williams, Diabate, and Nick Richards. But even if they were to do that, I think it's likely that Diabate is stealing a couple minutes from Nurkic, more so than that Williams is getting hurt too bad. The other thing that could potentially happen is Nurkic gets back into game shape and he starts cutting into Williams, which would suck. But for right now, I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption to just go with more or less what they did against the Lakers, where you're getting 29 minutes for Williams, you're getting, 17 to 19 for Nurkic. And so at 3% ownership, that does make Williams look pretty interesting. You can't call him a priority because you do have Jokic that you want to pay for. You have Embiid you want to get to at the position. You also have value at the position with Claxton, with Portland guys. You have Şengün, who I think looks really good. You have Kessler. So not a priority here, but at 3% ownership, I think he is a good way to differentiate. Tim L said as Damian Ball played himself in the steady minutes. So mostly I would say your guess is as good as mine, what Charlotte's doing with their bench guys. One thing I will point out is that I think, at least based on what Charlotte has done rotation-wise, the amount of minutes that Damian Ball can have played himself into is limited because he's been a point guard only. So what we've seen is that he has barely shared the floor with Elfrid Payton. They played a couple minutes together a couple games ago. And then last game, it was a 48-minute split directly between Payton, who started, and Ball, who played more minutes off the bench. So the problem here is unless they start playing him either off ball or alongside LaMelo or something, his maximum minutes would be 48 minus what LaMelo plays based on how they've used him so far. And so then it's, even if he has played himself ahead of Elfrid Payton, you're talking about like 15 minutes unless they change the rotation up. So I have basically Elf as the backup point guard today, and then Ball just like picking up a few minutes somehow. But I don't so long way of saying I don't know. But as long as LaMelo's in, I don't really care that much because I don't know where those minutes are coming from anyway. How many minutes do I think Tosin plays? 0. He is out, so I'm going to go with 0. But yeah, that's the answer on Ball. I think that where you need to really be considering him is the games that LaMelo sits, because clearly he can just play Elf off the floor even when Elf starts. I expect that to just be a nightmare going forward because you're going to have games where Elf plays well and doesn't get played off the floor. And then you're going to have games that go like last time where Ball plays 30 minutes or whatever it was to Elf's 16. So with LaMelo in, it's a spot where whether I'm wrong and Ball plays 15 and Elf plays 3 or 0 or whatever, it doesn't matter because I'm not playing either one of them. So those are the 3 I'm getting to from the Hornets. The field is getting to a little bit of Miles Bridges. That's perfectly fine at 8,400. But he's in that same bucket with Tyrese Maxey, where I think he's a little bit overpriced for when LaMelo is in, but he does still have a ceiling if you want to go there. There's no clear number 2 option. There's nobody competing with him to be the number 2 option behind LaMelo. So the ceiling is still there, but I had a lot of him last game against Denver. I don't have him today, at least right now. And then finally wrapping things up on the Portland side, where we do have a considerable Q tag. Peyton is on a 10-day. He, I think, just signed a second one at some point. Second 10-day was on February 18th. So yeah, like Peyton probably won't be around that much longer anyway. But while he is, it could potentially be annoying. For Portland, Robert Williams is questionable, and this does matter. In the games that Donovan Clingan has played without Robert Williams and without DeAndre Ayton, he's averaged like 26 and a half minutes per game. In the games he's played where Ayton has been out and Williams has been active, he's averaging like 22 and change, somewhere in there. So it does matter because Donovan Clingan is 5,300. And so at a 22 or 23 minute projection, he's fine, but he doesn't show up as that good of a play because you have Nick Claxton at the same price point projecting to play like 6 minutes more. You have all these other centers that are priorities as well. And then you also, if Williams is in, have a $3,900 Robert Williams, who we know is a good point per minute guy, who just played 25 minutes the last time he was in this situation, and who, we know can play low to mid 20s. So like projecting Williams for 20 and a half minutes, projecting Clingan for 23, I'm getting to more Williams by a lot at that salary. If you take Williams out though, then you're expecting Clingan to play like mid to upper 20s. You're expecting Jabari Walker probably to back him up. You probably get some backup 5 minutes from like Jeremy Grant where they play small. You can find some more minutes for Scoot. You can find some more minutes for Sharp off the bench. Avdia probably plays a little bit more. So it does just open up a lot of like, it makes a lot of changes to Portland's rotation that aren't super obvious if Robert Williams is out, and it'll make the team as a whole look better, but specifically Donovan Clingan, of course, will look quite a bit better. So that'll be something to pay attention to. I like Robert Williams if he's in. Denny Avdia, 37% owned, 6,100. I'm getting 64%. I think this is in part a Denny Avdia thing, and it's in part a what the slate gives you type of thing. There haven't been a ton of just like strong 6K price range plays that we've really liked on this slate, and most of them have been guards. So haven't really had forwards that we love. Haven't really had mid-range, 6K guys that we love. And then you get Denny Avdia kind of sitting here where it's like, okay, he's one of the better forward plays. He's one of the better 6K plays. He's just falling into a bunch of lineups. Playing time for him is volatile, but he does generally play a bit more when any of the starters are out. Because you do generally get, some small lineups from them, so he can play more. We know Ayton's out. And then again, I think that he just becomes even a little bit safer if Robert Williams is out. Also, Jeremy Grant, $5,100, 25% ownership. I'm getting to 38%. Again, I think he probably plays a little bit more if Williams is out. Hasn't been great lately, but the playing time should be there. And he's just at a bottom of market price overall this year, 0.8 DraftKings points per minute. You really would like more from him, but at 5,100, he's priced for that. And so he does still offer you some value here. Obviously a good matchup too against Charlotte doesn't hurt. Anthony Simons over the field on him at 6,500 should play a bunch of minutes, probably plays a little bit more could play a little bit more if Williams is out too. But again, he does typically play at least a little bit more when like Ayton is out. He averages about 34 minutes per game instead of 32 and a half. Talked about Williams. Kamara should play a lot here at 5,400. Shooting guard, small forward, so good positional eligibility as well. I'm not getting to 29%. I don't really think there's a huge problem with it. I think that his positional eligibility is really nice. I think the point per dollar value is nice. But again, I think it's just that there's enough other guys I can kind of mix and match exposure to that it's costing me some Kamara. I'm getting to a little bit of Sharp, a little bit of Scoot here. I do think I probably get to a little bit more of them if Williams is out, just because probably going from like 25-minute projections to like 26 and a half, something like that, because you would probably end up projecting something like 26 or 27 minutes to Clingan. If Williams is out, then you're probably projecting, and this is off the top of my head because I haven't actually gone back and looked, but I think probably something like 16, 17, 18 minutes to Jabari Walker, which then ends up leaving you with like, 6 minutes for Jeremy Grant, where everybody's sliding down, and it means that you have the extra minutes available to give Sharp / Henderson a little bit more playing time as well. So that is a spot that I'll be a little bit more interested in. Kamara also a little bit more interested in if Williams is out. But I think Portland in general looks very, very good here. I assume that I'll be late swapping in some way once we get Utah ownership and Robert Williams news. But I like that I'm getting a lot of the Houston-Utah game. I like that I'm getting a lot of the Portland-Charlotte game, or at least the Portland side. Should have plenty of flexibility to swap stuff around. Beedre said, do you have a read on Whitmore? I mean, I projected him to play, which is more than he did yesterday. I have him in for like 20 minutes, which is a little bit lower than we were seeing, earlier a few weeks ago. But I expect he's playing somewhere in the 20-minute range. I'm getting to him right now. That is in large part driven by ownership. He was projected for like 11% ownership, while some other similar guys were projected north of 20. But he's, to me, just like a solid, 5x give or take projection. But I do assume he's in the rotation today with Eason and with Tate out. So that wraps this one up. Thank you for checking out the show. I'm going to, again, be thrown off for a while by what day of the week it is. But thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the thumbs up button. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. You can get access to my projections with a 3-day free trial using that link in the description below. Other than that, good luck on your lineups tonight. Have a good rest of the weekend, and I will be back on Monday.